freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
How can I pledge allegiance to a country built on lies? Or raise my children to believe they're equal in its eyes? My leaders are assassinated for speaking their mind. So justice never tilts my way. I thought that she was blind. Isn't this America? Or is this America all a lie?
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop.
Looking in the rearview mirror, terrified by lights, waiting for these paper laws to play out in my life. But now I lay awaiting death, staring in the sky, killed by those sworn to protect me. What a way to die. Isn't this America? Or is this America all a lie?
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Amen, amen, amen. Good morning, Representative Elugurda. How are you? Good morning, Representative Elugurda. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
Awesome, awesome. So how are you recovering? That's first and foremost. I know we spoke on yesterday, but I'm sure our listening and viewing audience is praying for you and wondering just how are you overall recovering?
I appreciate the prayers. God is definitely using this time where I've had to slow down to teach me a lot. I am recovering well, but there have been, some complications that have extended it, and each one of them is being addressed in turn. But, it's been more than 5 months now, so I'm beyond ready to be 100%, but not quite there yet.
I'm so sure. It's interesting because, it's been almost, it's been over a year now that we have been experiencing the pandemic, right?
Right.
And so there's the pandemic, and then there's 5 months of what you're experiencing, recovering in the context of the broader, what we're all experiencing in this pandemic, and just all the things that are happening that the pandemic has raised that we've been working on prior to that in terms of the injustices and the systematic oppression and the dismantling of that in the midst of the pandemic.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's like being on a little tragedy within a tragedy, a little bit.
Yes.
But there's other ways to look at it that I try to tap into sometimes, because the pandemic has given us so much, trauma with death and sickness and isolation and mental health challenges, but many people have turned that suffering into something positive in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And our people, it is Black radio. Our people have a long history doing that, right?
Yes.
So the thing that I'm trying to be careful is to keep that instinct within the right framework, so that I am definitely allowing God to use my suffering to do good, but I am not becoming a martyr to myself, and suffering more than is necessary, that God is actually using the time of suffering to teach me to be healthier, to teach me to have pace, to teach me to have empathy in areas that I hadn't thought about, not just with regards to people who have health struggles, but people who have any kind of, the limitations we all have. And so that's been a challenge, because, that tendency to want to either be the hero or to be the strong one that perseveres, that runs deep in me, my family, my people. And it's a good thing, but it has to be in its place. And so that has been a big lesson, to take that crown and put that crown at the Lord's feet, and let Him handle things. As we all keep learning that in different ways, and the pandemic's a big example of that too.
It's true. I so appreciate your perspective, and it's all about perspective. So again, we're pleased to hear that you are recovering, and that that you are receiving all that God is allowing us to receive in the process of our overall recovery. Amen. So what's happening? I know there's lots of things that are happening in terms of legislatively on the state side, and we so appreciate you consistently being able to engage our listening and our viewing audience, and being accessible and being accountable and engaging your constituents. And so we're curious just with an update. With last month we spoke, and in the midst of all that you're going through, you were able to file quite a bit of legislation. So just give us an update with what is happening in the State House.
Sure. It's one of my favorite times in the season of the State House, because everybody is filing legislation, but I don't think that, I know I never realized, and I don't think a lot of people realize the creative art that drafting legislation is. Mm-hmm. And you're taking the vision and the dreams of a person, often not just the legislator, often not even just individual voters or constituents, but often advocates who have been crafting ideas and vision, like yourself, for many years. And they bring this vision to the legislator, and then we're able to work together to turn it into something that can actually change the law.
Yes.
And when you have so many who are really becoming knowledgeable about structural inequities, and I say so many, of course it's still a handful, but a handful is bigger than an empty hand.
Exactly.
And, it's growing, and we got more people trying to come in who have been studying this or experiencing the work of dismantling structural racism. So I have a bill I hope we'll talk about with you, Pastor Hobbs, and Miss Leslie Cradle, who works in housing justice issues for people who are formerly incarcerated, as is she, formerly incarcerated, and now is a nonprofit leader with Housing Justice for All. And we have a bill that we're working on. And then I have so many of my colleagues that I've co-filed with, including Mike Connolly. We always file some housing bills together. And Jamie Eldridge and I, he's a senator, filed some, usually something. And so we did a revenue bill to raise money for both climate and affordable housing. And now Jay Livingstone, who is really a prolific legislator in terms of moving things through, that are some big bills he's gotten through, and he has agreed. I asked him, could he mentor me around labor and employment legislation, because he's been a big mover in that. And he was even saying, like, especially with the area of women and people of color, he has been wanting to be able to hand off some of that, to people who are closer to the pain, so to speak. And so he was thrilled to have me make that essay. And we filed a couple of things looking at labor, particularly with domestic violence survivors. And so that's just my story, and that story gets repeated. I mean, especially if we look at the electeds of color who are very, very focused on issues of import to this audience. And I'm trying to help us get better at inviting the public into what is going on, because so often people are faced with the disappointment of what doesn't happen. And it's so important for people to understand all that is happening so that we can build on it and really identify where the obstacles are. So I have a couple of constituents who are helping me draft a series of videos, short 3 to 4 minute videos that take the filing process and the process of moving a bill. And I just share what I have learned about how the system works on the inside, reminding us that it's an organizing effort, just like getting elected or getting folks to mobilize to get a vaccine or getting folks to mobilize for justice in their neighborhoods, whether it's getting their streets fixed and their garbage picked up on time or getting good schools and libraries for their kids. That's the same kind of organizing that has to be done to mobilize legislators to vote for a particular bill. And those organizing skills really need to be translated, because a lot of people in our community have them translated to the inside the State House context. And sometimes we think, if it's a white man who has always had some power position, we need to come at him in a different way. But, having worked in different cities around Boston and a couple of countries as well, and all around the big country of India, which is very different culturally than the United States, the thing we have in common is that people need to be met where they're at and organized, rich or poor. And just like God doesn't show respect to person, people don't change necessarily that much based on their position. And so I'm very excited to be releasing those this summer and to be able to keep coming on this show to help people to answer questions or to figure out what more I need to learn, because it's not just about filing the legislation, but getting it to move. And we shouldn't just accept that it doesn't move. We got to learn how to make it move.
Yeah, that's powerful. So many things that you shared in terms of one. I'm really excited about the clips, the short videos. I think that's going to be really powerful for, as you've learned, to be able to put that in a using art or creativity in a way, and even media in a way that would be able to educate and in a way that we will be able to understand how to be able to do this civic engagement and policy change. Is something that sounds so daunting to many of us, and as you said, then moving legislation to the place of actually it being it being passed and into law, and then actually being implemented. I mean, that whole process of organizing, being able to come up with ideas and then put them into language that's drafted into into language that's an act, or that then becomes, and how do you move that through to be able to become law? That's huge. But then even that, and then how do you actually hold entities accountable to actually implement the laws that have been passed?
Exactly. And a lot of the distinctions that I find myself making, because we've been working on the content, doing all like a storyboard kind of a thing across different areas. So we got this procedure and policy. We got some things on criminal justice and policing. Just areas where I feel like there's been sometimes obstacles that are created by the difference between what people think is happening in the State House and what is actually happening in the State House. And, and even what people think is happening in the law and what is actually happening in the law. like with regards to our young men and women getting killed by police and others, at times in certain circumstances with impunity, some of that is vetted in the long term of constitutional jurisprudence, and the different laws we're trying to get passed now won't actually touch that. And so we'll still, even if we get everything we want that is currently been filed in Massachusetts on criminal justice or police reform, qualified immunity reform and all these different things, if we get all of that, we're still going to see the majority of the cases that are currently going where somebody is being abused in some way or experiencing an abuse of power, and the police officer, either the case is dismissed or most commonly, or the police officer is found not liable or not guilty. And this is because the reasonable search and seizure right we have a right, a constitutional right against unreasonable search and seizure. But the way that's been interpreted, if you look at some of that case law, actually has embedded in it things that inherently have a disproportionate negative impact on multiple groups: Black people, people with disabilities, particularly mental health disabilities, because of how the courts have interpreted that, and what reasonable looks like. That's been done through a lens that's not beneficial to us. So there's just so many things like that where the nuance and bringing in our genius ability as a people to sort of see what's real instead of what's presented to us, that's a long-term and long-time skill set that's been built amongst Black America. I hope people agree with me on that. And that needs to be applied through the law. And so we need our people to become elected officials and advocates, not just to mobilize energy, but to mobilize intellect.
You talked about the whole housing piece, and I'm really happy to hear you talk about the bills with revenue and housing and climate control for affordable housing. I mean, that's such a huge piece for returning citizens to really be able to be optimally productive, contributing citizens in society, is to be able to have those pieces in place. That's just a huge gap, I think, in services. So I'm really excited to hear that you filed legislation, and certainly looking forward to working with you to be able to move and implement programming that really is going to be able to help our returning citizens long term be holistically empowered to be productive, contributing citizens in society.
Yes, absolutely. And so I have a number of housing bills this time. I think 8.
8?
And yeah,
Wow.
and then Mike Connolly has a whole number that I signed on to with the intent to treat them almost like my bills with regards to how much we're going to push for them. But, because housing is our big thing. But I'm glad that you mentioned, or maybe I mentioned it, or maybe I mentioned it when we talked yesterday, this particular housing bill that we have filed it, but I put it through this process to allow me to work for a longer period of time on the drafting of the language, because we want to get this right. We don't just want the concept of equal access for housing for people coming out of incarceration or formerly incarcerated. We want to actually be able to see that come to pass. And so I'm working with House Counsel. For those who don't know or remember, those are the lawyers hired by the House of Representatives to, among other things, help legislators make sure that the legislation they file already has all of the legal kinks worked out, so that doesn't hold it up in the committee, that it's well drafted, well written. And also, in the case of the wonderful House Council members that I work with, I've worked with the same one now going on 3 years, and he's introduced someone that I believe he's training who has been fantastic for the last year. They also make sure, Nika, what is your vision? Or what is the vision that you're sharing with these advocates you've told us about? And is this language actually going to further the vision? So they've had me completely scrap a housing bill one time that I had drafted after something that I saw the governor approve, because I thought, wow, if I base it on something the governor has approved, then it will, be able to go farther. That was my rookie mistake, and Jim, one of the guys I worked with, he pointed out, Nika, what you're telling me as a vision is so much better than what has been filed here. So basing it on your vision is a much stronger approach. And it was a public housing expansion bill, and he had me take it totally blank and redraft it, taking each point of my vision, including empowering tenants in public housing to organize, to build generational wealth. And he was like, you're not going to get that by basing your bill on somebody else's bill, but we can draft that together, and we can create a program in the law that enables that. And that's exactly what we did.
Wow.
And while the bill didn't pass, it was very popular. It made it to the House Ways and Means list of bills to strongly consider. And I did get a call that they would be interested in keeping that momentum this session. And that has to be attributed to, again, bringing that intellectual strength to the process to make the vision plain on paper in a way that is attractive and feasible. And we can't do that alone, just like I can't do it alone, Like, I needed the advocates, I needed the community, and I needed the House Council. So with this bill around returning residents coming out of incarceration, we're looking at every place where there's a housing program that already exists, whether that's MRVP or, Section 8 or whatever, that has certain preferences set out for people who are experiencing homelessness or other characteristics. And we're adding in there a preference for people who are coming out of incarceration or have been recently incarcerated, and then an extra preference if they're in that situation and they don't have an address, right? Like they're moving around or they're sheltered or whatever it is, but they don't have a permanent address. And, we don't want to see this situation where I see it a lot with our black men who are living literally on the street. And then they come and hang out where they used to live, like in my neighborhood, that's formerly known as Bromley Heath. And when I hang out with them, sometimes they all know me. Some of them helped me get elected. They are either already productive or ready to be productive. But it's extremely depressing to not be able to come and live in your place where you grew up or near it, or even to have any place to live. And yet people are telling you need to get a job, and you got to hold a job even though you don't have stable housing, and you've been incarcerated for who knows how many years. There's so many changes and adjustments that are required there. Even if we apply the sufficient amount of mental health care and behavioral health care to that situation, if we don't give somebody a meaningful opportunity to live somewhere safe and comfortable, all of that is going to go to waste.
That's right.
And the infrastructure is already there, which is one of the things I learned from Jim, who was formerly a housing attorney, as it turns out, and also formerly on the housing committee for many years at the State House. And so we are combing with his young protege, who's also brilliant, combing the mass general laws. That's what we're editing when you make legislation. We're combing it for opportunities to just piggyback on places where the legislature has already in the past said there is some special population that needs preference here because of the urgency in their lives. And I'm also arguing here that it's a public good to make sure that formerly incarcerated people do not have the cards stacked against them with regards to avoiding recidivism. And also, many of the people, men and women coming out of incarceration, whether or not they were justly incarcerated, which is a miracle to me, whether or not they were justly incarcerated, many come out looking for ways to bless and protect communities and young people from going through what they went through. And it's impossible for them to do that fully if they don't have jobs and housing.
Yes.
And so this is actually more important even than just giving an individual a home and a job, because these folks, I think, in my experience, I don't have data on this yet, but they have a higher proportion, a higher tendency to be very engaged in the lives of potential offenders and to help them find a better path. And so we really need them to be and feel stable and cared for in the community. So I'm very excited about that bill in particular.
Very excited as well. Eric Kennedy, who, Eric serves as in many capacities, but one of which is as an executive assistant to me here at Healing Our Land, and really my go-to person who really drives everything that we do as it relates to empowering returning citizens. As a returned citizen, as you know, that's what drives everything that we do. And so we had a conversation on yesterday with regard to Al Amin, I think is his name, and the organizing efforts of AACC. And what does that stand for?
Al Amin, yes, Al Amin, with the African American Coalition Committee, which is a group of incarcerated activists at MCI Norfolk.
Yes. So really, really excited about, the organizing, even as you educated me on yesterday. They inform a lot of your policy and as it relates to dismantling structural racism and oppression, and they drive that work, they inform that work, and how and even the model of the board of directors for this organization and movement, to help us to understand how to be able to do this even on the outside. So I just think it's so important that, again, these are the voices that are informing and driving the work that we're doing, that's going to show outcomes and impact. That's a stark contrast of what we have experienced maintaining the status quo.
I'm so glad that you brought up the AACC. I wish if we had a little video, I would show you my AACC T-shirt that they sent me, which is so beautiful and encourages me every time I wear it. They gave one of those to Isabel, my former aide, and myself, because she also enjoyed going out there with me monthly, or just about monthly before COVID. And even during COVID, before my accident, we were able to connect on conference to move a little bit of the work forward that we had been doing. So, we say often, Pastor, at least where I grew up, that sometimes crime and despair, they take our most, our best and our brightest, Like when I was growing up, my dad, who, I'm probably biased, but I hear it a lot from a lot of people who grew up with him. My dad is a brilliant man. He was a brilliant young man. And he was aggressively recruited for drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises because of his brilliance. And when I was which he got out of as an older man, but I grew up with that. And when I was becoming a teenager, entering into middle school, the young black boys who were the most brilliant were often also the most discouraged. And being the type of little girl I was, I would kind of notice this and talk to them about it and try to tell them, because, my grandmother's tradition, who was a librarian at the Martin Luther King Branch Library in Columbus, Ohio, where I used to spend a lot of my time with her and the other black librarians, constantly giving me, speeches and words of encouragement. And I would pass that on to these boys. You're capable of so much. And yet, more than 90% of the time, at least in my neighborhood, they ended up in the street or in street life because they get aggressively recruited when they're very sharp, very socially and emotionally competent from the standpoint of, they're good salespeople, and when I go to MCI Norfolk, I'm just reminded of that
Mm-hmm.
because it's true.
Yes.
Our best and brightest minds, there are many that are in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go, I tell them, as far as I'm concerned, you do not belong here.
Mm-hmm.
You belong with us.
Yes.
And the AACC is a special group. As you said, they're organized they have a board of directors and members. And people that join this are already on a path to recovery and transformation
Mm-hmm.
and healing
Mm-hmm.
beyond what most of us get access to.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've talked about them, they say, "Well, we got nothing but time." The members of this group spend a lot of that time spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually sharpening themselves.
Yep.
Really facing what they have done, what has been done to them, healing from that, forgiving themselves and others, but then going further to say, how can I be an agent of change? So they do political organizing. I didn't know this until after I met them, after I was elected and sworn in. But during my campaign, which was the same time that Rachel Rollins and Liz Miranda ran, these men organized their family and friends outside of the wall
Yes.
to be mobilized in campaigning for us.
Yes.
And I didn't even know that. You know, I got so teary the first time. I walked in, and the same happened with Liz and Rachel. We walk in, and they're cheering for us, and we're like,
Wow.
I thought I was coming to meet, like, you know, one of the groups in MCI, whatever. And just the first time I went, I was sort of expecting, you know, like it is, like there's an inspiring group. You go, you get inspired. You're like, oh, that's good. They're doing the good work.
Right.
But I was blown away first by that. But then they start laying out constitutional arguments for dismantling structural racism. That's what got me thinking about that with regards to the topic I mentioned earlier.
Wow.
Around reasonable search and seizures. That's not the one they're talking about. They're talking about equal protection laws. They start laying out all this research that they have done with citations. And then the way that their board is organized. Now, I used to do board development for a living, as well as organizational development. And I've seen some amazing work and amazing boards here and in other countries.
Wow.
And they are in the top 10 of any board I've ever seen across the board.
Wow.
Use the play on words.
Wow.
But then in certain areas like mobilization and their intellectual consistency in bringing the vision into fruition in terms of like action items, they're in the top 3 for sure. And there have been times where I feel like I've never worked with anybody as good as you. And so they are my mentors, my trainers, and I have a whole host of people in my district who signed up to become trainees and mentees to them, advocates who realize like these are the guys with the goods intellectually, and we need to be following their lead. But then COVID hit, and so we had actually gotten as far as getting approval to have folks come in, but now we're going to have to sort of restart that whenever COVID ends. And also they have organized with me and with the Undersecretary Andrew Peck and Trucy Allah, who works for the DOC, and the commissioner, and also the secretary last year, Secretary Turkle. They all came on board. Russell Holmes, who introduced me, who's a representative in Mattapan, Roxbury, he introduced me to AACC. He also introduced the Undersecretary of Public Safety, right, to the AACC, and he was as impressed as everybody is. So we all need to go visit these guys when COVID opens up and be inspired and encourage them so that their numbers might grow.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they still have, you know, we used to call them the knuckleheads that won't be part of that, right? And the more they grow, the more they are kind of rescuing themselves and each other from the horrors of incarceration and mass incarceration. And they still have to endure a lot, but they create a protective bubble around themselves. And that encouragement comes from us going out there, not only to visit, you know, the people that are doing the worst, and mental health-wise, which is very important, but also to visit these people who have this miracle of overcoming while they're still there and doing more to improve themselves than most of us do, certainly than I do. Outside the walls when we have a lot more opportunities. So it's amazing, and I'm so grateful to them, and really look through their wives. I still get to communicate quite a bit, and we have some back and forth where I'm getting a little bit of information on what they've been trying to salvage during COVID, and but they wrote the first language on the Structural Racism Commission that I then filed in the policing bill under the with the partnership of the Black and Latino Caucus. We each took different pieces. That was my piece, and it got passed. And now I just found out I'm on that commission.
Wow.
And so, I can't wait to go and talk with them about it in person instead of just sending little notes through their wives, who are also powerful activists.
Wow. So through their wives, interesting. So now working with the coalition that we're working to be able to pass, broader legislation, pieces of legislation, as you're aware, we meet every Monday night with the coalition, and one of the things that in our not last night's meeting, but a week ago's meeting with State Representative Liz Miranda, as well as China Tyler, and help me, and Senator Hines, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, were the three legislators who were the filers on this kind of bigger package that the coalition is working on. That slivers of it are so many pieces of legislation. But one of the things that happened on the call is that they were Representative Miranda was talking about how she goes in and is actually engaging this particular group, and I've now been connected via technology to communicate via email to be able to have them have voice and presence at our weekly meetings. In fact, again, all the work that we're doing is driven and informed by directly impacted folks. In fact, one of the things we talked about, who are the other entities that need to be a part of the coalition that can, again, be driving and helping to make sure that even the stuff is implemented, and that we're even paying our return citizens to help us to do the organized and the mobilizing and the implementation of programming. And so, being able to have this specific group to consistently, to have permission, because that becomes some of the challenges, as you were saying, permission that they need to be able to participate in these processes that will change not just them, their situations, but other folks who could go down that same path.
Right. And you mentioned the power team there with Representatives Tyler and Miranda and Senator Hines, passionate people, and our House members in that group, I know very well, have been deeply personally impacted by incarceration and mass incarceration, and they bring that passion and that force to the work. So I'm excited for the very big omnibus bill, I call it, that they have filed with the coalition, and they're going to bring all of their skills for mobilizing into raising awareness of that, into pushing it through the building. So I'm very excited about that, and Liz and Representative Andy Vargas and a couple of others. Like, once Russell Holmes introduced us, man, we all just took off. And Liz has a special gift, in my opinion, to sort of bear, as we had talked about yesterday, the individual touch. So she'll visit like 50 people or 30 people who are in, they call it now restricted housing. We have known it as solitary. They've made some changes, so now they call it restricted housing. But it still has a lot of problems. And those are institutionalized, really, in the law. And so, one of the really important things is to hear from their own mouth what's going on. And I also have made it a new practice that I established right before my accident. Unfortunately, we were able to do it in COVID, though, is to also organize some of the correctional officers and to organize the incarcerated activists too, the ones who aren't having the biggest struggle, to say, like, how can you work closely with the administration, not just with the legislators, to help them redo the policies. A lot of listeners will know you have legislation, the law, which is drafted and passed by the legislature, but the executive branch controls the policies. So if the law says that you have to make it, easier for people to get educated, then the DOC, the Department of Correction, or other higher up entities in the Baker's administration, the governor's administration, has to go forward and say, like, these are the regulations and policies that govern how we do that. And so really, we have, I feel like what's emerging is such a comprehensive team, because, China really focusing on criminal justice and the behavior of officers and the fairness and justice elements in the building or behind the walls. And Liz is kind of all over the place with it. Like, she's doing a little bit of everything. But I particularly admire her focus on the individual experiences of people and making sure those are just and fair, but looking at that from a systemic lens. And, Andy Vargas has been working on a lot of structural change. He has a loved one who is incarcerated and is deeply motivated. And, I've been working on, like, involving the administration in the work of the AACC and trying to get the DOC or the correctional officers also involved, so that we have agreement and build capacity and training these folks, even as they have trained me, giving back with some of the training that I have around how to build working groups and learning teams that can be productive, even though they have very diverse interests. And so we had started that work, and I'm looking forward to picking that up again. I hope that it hasn't been completely derailed by COVID and my accident, but I'm trusting God, because He told me and tells me so many times, I'm meeting all of your needs. Do you think I won't be addressing the most important things that I have you working on? Do you think I'm only paying attention to your food and water and your rent? No. I definitely have my mind on all these things and my hands on them. But you know how it is. It's like you got to get yourself into a place of trust when things start going wrong.
Yes,
but,
yes.
I can't do it all, and even all together, we can't do it all. So we really depend on God to not only order our steps, but also to do a lot of the heavy lifting, especially around hearts and minds. And I'm so grateful that the undersecretary is so on the same page with Rep. Holmes and myself and others. And has really been facilitating a lot of this movement towards real structural change that lasts in both branches, legislatively and administratively.
Incredible. You're so right, and I so appreciate your perspective as a legislator who unapologetically and consistently points to your empowerment, your direction, your leadership, your hope, all coming from God. And so I really do appreciate, as a person of faith, you as a legislator, never shrinking or, minimizing that influence and direction in your life as a legislator.
Oh, absolutely. Jesus is the singular only person who could have gotten me to run for office. So, he used a lot of people to influence it, but I only even listened to them because the Lord has clearly said to me, consider a career in politics. And I was devastated 15 years ago when I heard that word from God. But, if Jesus ever becomes a problem to anybody, then I'm good, because, I'm here for Him. So if y'all don't want me here because of that, let me know.
It's so funny you say that.
He's the one that made me come here, and so
He's going to keep you there. It's funny you say that, because there are people who have said to me, you should consider running for office, and I'm like, it's laughable to me. It really is. I'm just like, are you out of your mind? And literally, I say, just as you said, literally, God will have to speak to me Himself and make it resoundingly clear that is what he would want me to do before I would ever even consider.
Resoundingly. If I told one of these times, I'll tell you the story. And I was obnoxiously demanding at the types of confirmation I would need. I was worse than Gideon with the wool.
Yes.
And he just was like, fine, I'll do all the things you need. And he did them. And I was like, okay, this is definitely God. And so I had to do it. But I asked him to change my heart. And everybody, I hope, knows that by the time I ran, I was happy to do it. And I loved being there. And it turns out I loved the job. I wasn't expecting to love the job. I thought it would be a big sacrifice to my life. It is a sacrifice, but a happy one, that I enjoy. It's not what I had seen myself doing, but I didn't have any particular plans of my own anyway, Just like kind of rolling through, seeing what God wanted from moment to moment. And now, he's laid out a little bit more of it, ahead of me, which I was always asking for as a younger woman. I'm still young, I'm 47, but, in my 20s, I'm like, God, give me more information, like show me further into the future.
You're right.
And then when he finally did, I was like, that's not the future I wanted. But okay,
yes.
but you got to like humble yourself.
Yes.
And which ends up being a really delightful gift, but a perpetual challenge.
Absolutely. Brother Eric Kennedy, who he's assisting in the studio, he also raised the question, how do we go about addressing probation fees? Even now, I'm being asked and even sometimes threatened to be surrendered if they are not paid, with all disregard of us being in a pandemic and regular citizens are having trouble finding work.
Right. There's more to this than what I can answer because it's not an area of expertise. I just called up last year for the first time and met the commissioner of probation and started talking with him. But we did put in the DLC Structural Racism Commission to take a look at reentry and to take a look at probation, as well as what happens internally. So what I would say is get my office, any of our offices in the Black and Latino Caucus, or in Judiciary Committee, but get my office write it up for us and make it plain that you're responding to something I said. Like, it's helpful to me because I get so many emails and I really struggle to get back to all of them timely because I don't have a big staff like the senators or the committee chair people. I just have one. If you put in the subject line, regarding your speaking at Boston Praise Radio or something like that, so I know that this isn't just like a group thing that people are just sending to everybody, because I can't follow up on all of those. So I try to focus on the ones that come to Nika.
Yes.
Nika, we heard you do X, so we want you to do, say my name, Rep Nika. And if I see that Rep Nika in the first thing, that's always the first thing I read every morning, is things that say Nika. Because anybody that's saying Nika, they're talking to me, right? And so after you say Nika, then say, here's a write-up, Mr. Kennedy, of some of the things that I have seen that I would like you to take into that commission work. And we'll start a file on that. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know who the chair of the commission is, if they're going to be down with this vision that gave birth to the commission. I will forcefully advocate for that, obviously, and that will include hearing the voices of people impacted as leaders and advisors, and not just as recipients of our grace, which is very often the attitude that we can have about social change, which is a counterproductive attitude. But I will at least be armed with your notes, on here's what I'm experiencing. And if you want to, even if you have files collected, we could have a meeting at some point after the commission gets rolling, so that I can be bringing your learning into that experience of the commission. And I've never been on a commission, so a legislative commission, so I don't even know if what I'm saying will work, but this is how I'm envisioning it working, right? I'm learning as a commissioner. I have overseen a couple commissions already, and that's how they work. They go out, the community gives them input, they each come back with sort of an equal voice to say, here's what I think we should work on, and then the committee votes on that, or the commission votes on that. So that's a very general answer, but it's what I can do. But you could also reach out directly to judiciary and say, I have this question, I know there's this commission, who do I talk to make sure that these issues get addressed? So I would recommend doing that formal process as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I just want to tag on that, Pastor, to say an important thing
Yes.
about shifting our mindset. If you see yourself only through the lens of being oppressed by the legislative systems and structure,
Mm-hmm.
then our only models, which are important models but insufficient, our only models are adversarial
Mm-hmm.
and calling out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see yourself to be like ants, you can also, because that is true, see ourselves as people of power in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we don't feel it yet, we're calling it out.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you call up the Judiciary Committee, you will speak with power.
Mm-hmm.
And you will say, I know that you are tasked with doing this on behalf of the people. I'm grateful for that. I would like to see it move in this direction. Who can I talk to?
Mm.
And very often, people are very receptive to that because, believe it or not, a lot of state reps are really there for public service. That's something I have learned.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of dynamics that kind of mess up our ability
Yep.
to do all that we would like to do.
Yep.
And, some people that have studied systems thinking and stuff, or have worked in systems where they have, in the school of life, you learn about how systems work, right?
Yeah.
Some of those folks are bringing a sophistication to analyzing, okay, here's what's holding me back. But a lot of people don't come from a background where they've done a lot of things outside of politics
Mm-hmm.
or in communities like ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't necessarily, that's not some of the sophistication that they're bringing. And it holds them up, and people fall into patterns of counterproductivity.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rarely, although it does happen, that you just have a lazy or not caring or do-nothing public servant,
Yep.
and they chose to come and be a public servant as the place they were going to be a lazy do-nothing status seeker. That's our, vision of who a politician is. But that's actually... not very many of them are like
right.
that.
That's
at
not
least
their aspiration.
not right now.
Maybe becomes that by default, right? But I don't think they go there.
It has the same effect of that because the system is set up against all of us, and nobody's really historically been checking that. And that's a lot. That's the labor-intensive work, and like I said, you have to mobilize not only energy, but you have to mobilize intellect, and we don't learn to do that very well in the American system. And then yet we have all this pride around what we're like. So then we still, without the humility, you won't even go back and check it, right? And so go with power into these places. I say that even to my youth. Representative salaries are paid by you. As soon as you get a job, you're paying our salary. You're paying for the state house. You're paying for that gold dome and everything that keeps it running. Come in here like we represent you. And I tell kids all the time, if you're supposed to be in a basketball tournament and you get hurt or something happens in your family, so you want to send somebody in your place as your representative, who are you going to pick? You're going to pick somebody that's going to represent you well. They're going to do a good job. They're going to help your team win. That's what a representative is. It's somebody that you have selected and said, go forth and do the mission that I have on my behalf, right? And we need to treat myself as a representative, but every representative like that. So if they have a leadership position, such as chairing the Judiciary Committee, the former chair of the Judiciary Committee is now a majority leader, and I have seen her cry and be upset and move to tears over letters that she has gotten where people were like, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. I was shocked because I look at what the Judiciary Committee produced before the policing bill, and I was like, this is such a racist thing. And I thought she was going to be like a very antagonistic person, And God was just like putting me in different situations where I got to work with her, and I realized, oh, this is another place where I let my assumptions drive what I thought would happen. You know what I'm saying? And we worked together really well. She fought hard to get that structural racism commission in part because of that work. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so if I had been like, you're such a racist, you have all these microaggressions, you don't know anything about us, white lady, which was honestly the feelings I was having. and not giving her the benefit of the doubt, that might have gone very differently, right?
Yeah.
It might have gone exactly as I had expected.
Yeah.
But when I was like, I have concerns about you and about how judiciary operates, but, I want to hear. And she talked to me about herself and the work that she had done to try and be anti-racist. It was all a big surprise to me. And when she experienced that respect, she gave it back,
Yes.
And that was, I had to swallow my pride to have that moment.
Yes.
But then now, I understand
Yes.
we could get a lot more moved
Yes.
by seeing each person as somebody who is empowered to work for the people
Yes.
and calling them out in that. And we will be disappointed,
Yep.
by some people,
Yep.
but many people will pleasantly surprise us,
Yeah.
and that's better than just writing everybody off
Yep.
and nobody surprised them. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, Representative, unfortunately, can you believe our time has already has passed? I mean, this is always so substantive, and so unfortunately, we have to end it. But we look forward to you being with us again on next month, and of course, we'll be engaging prior.
Well, we'll never end, right? It's monthly, so we'll just pick right up where we left off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative. Have a great day.
All right, my dear brother. You too.
All right. God bless.